I do want to say a few things about Ludwick. But first of all, I want to say something about what I'm doing here. And I do, frankly, occasionally ask myself, what are you doing, Jim? What the hell are you trying to do? The best answer I can give to that is I'm trying to learn something about the past of this area in the department of making things, production. When I've looked at the histories that have been written around the area, about the area, Greensburg and Hemphill Township, I find a lot of stuff that is very useful and interesting. I mean, the people that have covered the area, they've talked about educational history and religious history, social history, and all the various areas that you think about when you talk about the history of an area. But the one thing that tends to be missing a lot of times is industrial history. And I almost don't want to use that term because people hear the word industrial history and they don't want to hear it, frankly. But anyhow, it's something that interests me, and I try to focus on that. You'll notice I did some things on Dutchtown. That was the first place where there was any real clustering of production facilities, you might say. And the next place that it happens that there's a clustering of places where things were done was in Ludwick. And that was not by accident. There was a real reason for that. The reason was the railroad came through in the early 1850s and they put a railroad yard there. And that was a mega big thing for clustering of production facilities, not just production facilities, but they had a railroad yard there where all the farmers in the area could bring their produce and ship it out. Also, the guys who were interested in building or making things could bring in the raw materials needed for production and make things. They could bring in machinery that they needed to make things, and then they could ship it out. And right in Ludwick, because there was once upon a time a railroad yard there, and that's something that most people have forgotten about. So we're going to take a little look at some of the pictures here. I'll take this off of the tripod and see if we can focus in on some of the things. We're looking at what was once upon a time Will Stokes' home. Will Stokes. Now I may have to do a few bits of bouncing around here. Stokes was a lawyer. That's at Seton Hill. And that was one time the mansion of Will Stokes. That building was Will Stokes' mansion. And in a very drastically altered state, it still exists, sitting at Seton Hill. That's what it looks like today. You never recognize the place. A lot of 70s architectural fluff has been put on there. But Will Stokes was important because he made the first plan of lots for Ludwick. He also owned all that property up there. He was a Philadelphia lawyer that came with the railroad and left with the war. At the time the Pennsylvania Railroad was being built in the 1850s, he showed up, would look like, to do a bit of profiteering. As a lawyer, he was interested in money. But I don't want to downplay the guy. He was a decent character. He had enough money to buy himself out of the war, but when the Civil War came along, he accepted a commission as major and also opened his mansion as a place where people could come to recruit for the war. But this shows up to point out the fact that before Will Stokes was ever there, as early as 14, there was production going on in Ludwick. Sam Bushfield had a brickyard there in Ludwick. He was also a Methodist preacher, the guy who founded Methodism in the area. This is what that area looks like. There was a brickyard right there, Sam Bushfield's brickyard. That's the view of what a brickyard used to look like. This is a look at Ludwick in the early days, 1854. You might notice this was the freight station, a big issue for the development of Ludwick, simply because stuff could come in there to get the industry, whirls of industry going. The farmers could send their produce out, and it became the major factor for the development of Ludwick when the first plan of lots was established by Will Stokes in 1854. This was the first freight station, which was not where the freight station sits now. That's the freight station that's there now, and it sits to the west of Depot Street. But the one I just showed you sat to the east of Depot Street, and the railroad actually moved that thing. This front part on it was built after it was moved, but this back part was actually moved the whole way from where it sat in the railroad yards to the present location. It's no longer a freight station. This is the old order of things in Ludwick. You see up here, we're looking at Will Stokes' house, mansion. He had a farm up there. This is the earlier position of the freight station. And we see the earlier Ludwick. This is that old freight station in the earlier position. This was the Zonheiser Lumber Company. And up front is the tower, GU Tower. It was one of those towers that the railroad put there to control the interaction of traffic. This was Zonheiser Lumber Company that one time sat in Ludwick. This gives you a picture of Ludwick in the 1860s. You see how it developed. When it was incorporated in 1859, there were 25 citizens and something like between 20 and 30 houses. And by 1867, it had developed to a degree. You can see by 1867, the freight station still sat in the earlier location. This is what it looked like when the Ludwick Plan of Lots was first laid out by Will Stokes. He was a lawyer and was able to get things done like this. Everything in yellow was what the railroad, the Pennsylvania Railroad, owned. This was their freight yard. There was one time an array of railroad tracks coming into here that was the place where people could ship things out and bring things in. This is really what made Ludwick develop as an industrial area. The railroad yard, something that a lot of the kids of today don't even know existed. This is something in Google Mapping, which I point out to show. This was the railroad yard. This right here. This is the main line of the railroad, which came through in the early 1850s. And there was a fanning array of railroad tracks that came into this yard once upon a time that brought a lot of stuff in and a lot of stuff out. Maybe I could mention that 1853 was the first year of operation, complete year of operation of the railroad. And in the first half of that year, 3.5 million pounds of freight was shipped out from the freight station there. I mean, it was a big deal for Greensburg to have a freight station. Now it doesn't even matter. I mean, it's not even a railroad yard anymore. There's no longer a freight station there. It's just something from the past. But it's just something that's worth pointing out. And I think we're just about at time now, and I'm going to say so long.